The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Building domestic infrastructure capacity is critical to reducing our reliance on foreign-made machinery, safeguarding our seaports from debilitating cyber attacks, and maintaining functional equipment. Thoughtful consideration of modernization of procurement policies to benefit the utilization of domestically manufactured equipment is critical to mitigating our reliance on cranes produced by foreign actors. Due to cost, regulations surrounding procurement, and other limitation, nearly all cranes used in U.S. seaports are manufactured in China. This includes 2 of the 5 cranes at Port Tampa Bay. I appreciate the thoughtful discussion and testimony we've heard already today about this issue and how we can be working together to mitigate these threats and ensure that our ports are safeguarded. I'd like to follow up, Secretary Brzezowski, with you on this question. As members of Congress, we spoke a little bit earlier about supply chain as it relates to cranes. I'm interested in your thoughts on what we can be doing as members of Congress to work with DHS to help build domestic infrastructure capacity for components of the supply chain as it relates to our cranes.
Thank you very much for the question. Again, I think, thank you for your leadership, and I think we agree that there's very serious vulnerabilities associated with an over-reliance on any type of supply chain component that's not produced here in the United States. The Department of Homeland Security is not in the position of providing a lot of the incentives to incentivize domestic production beyond our partnerships with them to make sure that they're understanding that being part of a secure and resilient supply chain is something that's going to afford them opportunities. If an adversary, we know that if an adversary is exploiting some of these systems, the port can completely shut down. That's why we're working very closely with the Department of Transportation, the Department of Commerce, on some of these incentive programs. So I think full funding of those programs, communication out to your constituencies about the availability of these programs, and a amplification of the vulnerabilities that we're seeing from a security perspective would just raise the attention and promote further production of some of these capabilities.
Thank you. Admiral Arguin, one of the other things that we've heard mentioned today is the executive order that the President recently signed to empower the Coast Guard to issue directives regarding cranes manufactured in the PRC. Can you touch on what actions, how crane operators have responded and how this is affecting your operations?
So, ma'am, the Maritime Security Directive required notification of affected crane owners and operators within 48 hours. We've touched base with each one of those crane operators. They've acknowledged that that the Maritime Security Directive applies to their operations. And so we're now continuing the conversation about what needs to be done within the elements of the sensitive security information to close those vulnerabilities. If there are questions that come up about the specific details, then my colleague at Coast Guard Cyber will be able to support, or others that have technical supporting roles will be able to help them close those vulnerabilities. And then there's a window that we will have confirmation that all of those vulnerabilities have been closed within those ports.
And Admiral Van, would you add to that response for us?
Yes, Congresswoman. As was alluded to, if it's determined that vulnerabilities do exist, as I mentioned earlier, open doors in the network on the cranes or to the cranes, the services that we provide from Coast Guard Cyber Command assess those vulnerabilities, can hunt to see whether or not there's adversarial action on the crane network, and then help the operator eradicate it. There are other sources of these types of services. Some companies have them internal to their organizations. Others can hire this kind of help, but we can validate behind someone else's actions. We actually will deploy out into the port onto the crane network, and we're doing that now. As was mentioned, we've assessed almost half of the PRC manufactured cranes in the country already.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you to the gentlewoman from Florida.